Okay, for this video I want to cover the IRS Form 1099 DIV for dividends and distributions, but specifically I want to address what happens when you have federal income taxes withheld on your distributions. So I have a sample 1099 DIV here for our taxpayer, John Q. Taxpayer. We can see here he's got dividend income reported, so ordinary dividends of $4,300 of which is qualified. And in box 4 he has some federal income tax withheld of $240. So we want to talk about some scenarios where why that would happen and what do you do when it comes to reporting that on your tax return. So we've got the 1099 DIV. In addition to that, I do have a full 1040 for a taxpayer here. So we have John Q. Taxpayer's Form 1040. He's a single filing taxpayer. So we'll go through his Schedule B to report the interest income, and then we'll also look at where he reports that federal income tax is withheld. And in addition to those two items, I do have one slide here covering some background on the 1099 DIV and then just more information on federal income taxes withheld under this scenario and then the fact pattern itself. So broadly speaking here, 1099 DIV, that's for dividends and distributions. It's filed when a corporate taxpayer distributes money, so cash or property, to a shareholder, right? And it can take many different forms, right? So when we look at 1099 DIVs, normally we think of just ordinary and qualified dividends, but it includes things like capital gain distributions, non-dividend distributions, investment expenses, foreign taxes withheld, Section 199A dividends, a lot of different pieces, as we can see if we look at a 1099 DIV form. So in our scenario here, what we want to focus on is, well, what happens if you had some kind of federal income taxes withheld on the distributions? Why would that happen? So in box 4 of the 1099 DIV, you see an amount for federal income taxes withheld. Now, the vast majority of taxpayers are never going to see an amount here, right? And that's because, generally speaking, U.S. taxpayers, so long as they provide a W-9 and a valid tax ID, there's not going to be any federal withholding on any distributable amounts that you might see in these boxes. In this case, we do have federal income taxes withheld for backup withholding reasons. So why would you have federal income taxes withheld? And backup withholding is, frankly, the number one reason why you would even see that amount on your 1099. So backup withholding requires payors of certain types of income, which includes dividends, to deduct and withhold federal income taxes if the payee, so this is the recipient of the income, fails to provide a valid taxpayer ID number. Now, that's the number one reason that we see, but there are also other reasons. The payor might receive a notice from the IRS saying that you haven't been compliant with all of your tax reporting, and so they require the payor to do backup withholding. But a lot of times it happens because you simply haven't provided valid taxpayer ID number, name, address, and so the payor tried to, or did, in fact, withhold taxes. So let's look at a fact pattern here where our taxpayer had this backup withholding apply, and then they fixed the issue, but nevertheless it was still reported and they still had some taxes withheld. And how do they deal with that kind of issue? So in this example here, we have John Taxpayer puts $100,000 into a non-publicly traded company. So he becomes a shareholder by contributing $100,000 and he gets stock in exchange. Now the corporation has a history of doing quarterly dividends. So every quarter they distribute dividends to the shareholders. And the first quarterly dividend that was going to be paid to John was going to be $1,000, right? Now, before the corporation distributes the dividends, they ask John, like they do all the shareholders, I need you to sign a W-9 or a W-8, whatever the appropriate form is. Provide me your name, address, your tax status, and your taxpayer ID number. Now, John, just because he was a little lazy, failed to provide this on a timely basis. So when the company distributed the dividends to all of the shareholders, the $1,000 that was provided to John was subject to backup withholding because he did not timely provide a W-9 with his name, address, tax status, Chapter 3 status that is, and his valid taxpayer ID number. So backup withholding requires the payor to withhold 24% of the gross payment amount. So if you have dividends of $1,000, they have to withhold 24%, which is $240. If it's interest income, royalties, rents, all the same principles apply, right? Backup withholding is at 24%. So the first distribution that John got of $1,000, he only actually received $760, and that's because the corporation applied the backup withholding rules and kept 24% or $240. Now, after John saw this, he decided, okay, well, maybe I need to get this thing done, and so he did complete the W-9, provided that to the corporation, and so the remaining dividends that he received, the corporation did not backup withhold. So he got $4,000 total in dividends throughout the year, and he had some backup withholding, which the company already remitted to the IRS, so they're not going to refund it, of $240. So when he gets his 1099 DIV from the corporation, he can see all these amounts reflected there, right? He has $4,000 of dividend income that was paid to him during the year, and he can see here in box 4 that I had federal income tax withheld at $240. Now, that money is not all lost, right? He can use that as a credit on his federal tax return. So where does he report that information? Well, if we start with Schedule B for the dividend income reported on Schedule B, so he has Part 2, ordinary dividends, Fake Corporation Inc. He's reported the $4,000 in ordinary dividend income. And of the $4,000, $3,000 was qualified. So we can see $3,000 in qualified dividend income there. We have ordinary dividend income of $4,000 here. And so he computes the federal income tax he owes using the qualified dividend and capital gains worksheet and figures out, okay, how much in tax do I actually owe? Now, the federal income tax withheld is reported in lines 25. So line 25A, we can see the federal withholding from his W-2 income. So that's his W-2 income, and the withholding tax is reported there. That's fine. That's normally what we would see. But on line 25B for Forms 1099, we can see the federal income tax withheld amount there. So if you have federal income taxes withheld on your 1099 DIV, and you're filing a 1040 for this shareholder, the federal income taxes withheld amount in box 4 can be reported here on line 25B. And so the total amount of payments or amounts withheld is the aggregate of all these amounts. So $21,240 are the total amounts of federal income taxes that were withheld from payments to John. So he does get a credit for those taxes withheld. Again, it's not lost forever. Now, one thing to note that's really important here is, remember, in our fact pattern, John figured this out in the middle of the year and did correct the issue. So the 1099 DIV was reported to John under his recipient TIN. So he did provide the tax ID number. If you're in a position where you received income but you never provided a TIN, then that means that the payor is filing a 1099 without your tax ID number, but they still had to pay the tax on your behalf. This makes it very, very difficult for you to get credit for the amounts withheld. And this is because the IRS systems really only work that well if they are tracing these dollar amounts to a TIN number. So if you don't have a valid Social Security number or an ITIN in this field, it's going to be very tough for you to claim these credits because the system is just going to reject it. The system will look at the withholdings that you've claimed here and it'll say, well, we have no record of a 1099 showing federal withholding of $240 because it's not traced to your TIN. So very, very important, before you receive any kind of income from a U.S. payor, make sure you provide an accurate W-9 or W-8 form, provide all the information as required so that you're not subject to these backup withholding amounts. All right, so that covers it for this video. I hope that was helpful. Of course, if you have any questions on 1099 DIV or any kind of 1040 questions on withholding taxes, Schedule B for interest and dividends, please feel free to leave me a comment below. Happy to answer as many questions as I can get to. And of course, always look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thanks so much. Bye.